Thank you. Can everyone hear me? That's all right, not too loud, not too soft. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. And I was quite fortunate because I've never been to Adelaide before, so I've spent the last couple of days running around trying to understand your city a bit. And so it's a beautiful city, and you've got a lot of space to play with. So yeah, I'm here to talk about Auckland City Centre, and in particular the shared space program is a bit of a theme of which way's which. I think my presentation's a bit large, so I'm going to probably keep quite a quick pace, and then I'll probably ramble in the middle, and then I'll panic at the end, and then just go even faster. So it might be a bit of a roller coaster, and I'll either finish early, be on time, or be rather late. So we'll just see how we go. So what I'm going to go to today is I'll give you a bit of a context on Auckland and the city centre, and it'll be pretty light and a bit bitty, but just to give you a bit of sense of who we are and what we're doing. And then the second half, I'll kind of get into the shared space program, and I'll talk about some of the catalysts and enablers that we had to do our program. I'll go through quickly a few different case studies, and then sort of reflect on some of the overall learnings. So Auckland, and this, I'll go through this quickly, we're 1.5 million people, and I think that's kind of similar to your greater Adelaide, which I think is 1.2, 1.3. We're a very diverse city. We've got over 180 different ethnic groups, and we're quite critical to the New Zealand as in the economy. We've sort of got a third of the workforce. We're also a very fast-growing city, so we're the largest by far in New Zealand, and we've been growing at the high prediction for quite a few years from a mix of migration and immigration into Auckland. And that's creating one of our key challenges at the moment is housing and housing affordability. Back in 2010, we turned into one council. Before that, we had 8 councils. Before that, we had 30 boroughs and something else. And so when we first came into being in 2010, we were a bit of a beast. We're over 10,000 staff members. I haven't met them all yet, but I'm sure they're all very nice. But the first thing we had to do was set a new strategy and vision for Auckland, and the Mayor set down the vision of becoming the world's most livable city, which is quite a challenge. But at the same time, it's reasonably achievable because we do sit within good company like yourselves in Melbourne. We're often in the top 10, depending on which ranking you go for, and I'm sure we'll just go for whatever we get first. But, you know, it is doable. And part of that, you know, we've got a really good education and health system in New Zealand, but really we've got a beautiful natural environment in Auckland. So we've got a massive coastline, we've got a number of different harbours, we've got 50-odd islands in those harbours, and we sit in a volcanic field, which is quite a beautiful landscape. Probably not the best place to put a city, but it's been all right so far. But when you go into the built environment, is it stunning? Not really. There's a number of reasons for this. I mean, we're quite a young country from modest beginnings, and so we haven't got sort of the beauty of some of the European cities. We are getting better at what we're doing in the built environment, but we've got a heck of a long way to go. And part of this is really the choice that we made, and you know, America and Australia did the same thing. The choice that we made in the 50s and 60s, where we started building quite an aggressive motorway program, and we're still doing that today, which is good. But that has caused you know, some major problems for us. We're being called the City of the Cars, which is not the best name to have. And we've gone through the urban sprawl, which I think a lot of Australian cities are going through. And we're wedded to the car as New Zealanders. But that's more recently turned into a bit of a forced marriage because we don't really have any other partners to go with. It's not so bad for the city centre because there are alternatives, but if you go for the broader region, it's pretty hard to move around without having a car. Oh yes, sorry. So if you look at this graph, this is the patronage by mode, just for public transport, over the past 100 years, and it looks slightly depressing when you kind of look at it. I mean, it's a lot of this is the effect of spending a lot of money into the motor vehicle, and there's a few dips and hollows where we've got the Great Depression and things, but overall it just slides down into the dark ages in the early 1990s. But the tide is changing a bit, and we're getting a lot better than what we've been doing for many a year. So since 2000, we've upgraded over 40 different train stations across the region. We've double-tracked the lines, some of them were single-tracked, which was not ideal. And we've also electrified the entire network. And as of yesterday, we've completed the rollout of a new electric fleet of rail. And our number one project for Auckland Council is a $2 billion city rail link, which will basically double the capacity of the rail network and also make the efficiency or speed of it double as well. So that's a pretty big task, and it's going to affect the city centre quite a lot as we dig up a lot of streets to do the sort of underground works. We've also established an integrated ticket across all modes and all operators, and this is all kind of basic stuff, but we didn't have it before, so it's a bit of a game changer. And for the bus network, which is our kind of main way of moving around for public transport, we're currently overhauling the whole network. So over the old 50, 60 years, it's just kind of being a sort of ad hoc, evolving kind of mess of spaghetti. And so we're overhauling that, and Emma Cagney's been heavily involved in that. And we're also putting in 40 kilometres of new bus lanes around the city. And probably quite relevant to this conference is that about 3 weeks ago we announced a big fund to go into cycleway investment. So we're going to spend $200 million over the next 3 years, which is rather unheard of. And hopefully that starts giving us a bit of a network, because our current network doesn't exist. So just this is going into the city centre a bit more. Again, we're talking about the tide changing. I mean, we look at residents in the city centre. Again, in the dark ages of the 90s, we didn't even have 2,000 people living there, which is pretty poor. We've got just gone over 30,000 people last year, so that, in terms of the vitality of the city, that's changing quite a bit. We're a university city, so within the city centre we've got 2 universities, so that gives us a lot of energy, a lot of students coming into town. And while Auckland's a sort of polycentric city, we've got a lot of sort of centres around. The city centre is certainly the hub of the economic side. So we've got over almost 100,000 people coming in every day to work. So in response to a lot of the issues that we had, excuse me, I'm getting lost. Going into some of the issues that we have in the city centre, this is, there's another 4 of them, but I just sort of picked this one out, which has a common theme in here about traffic and the car that's caused a lot of our problems. So we've got we've basically cut off from our neighbouring suburbs by a motorway ring. You've got quite a nice park system. We've got a jungle of concrete. We've got some pretty major arterials that go right along our waterfront, so we're kind of divorced from the harbour, and then the overall transport network is rather under strain. In response to some of those issues and a number of other ones, and also the challenge of becoming more livable, we developed the City Centre Masterplan in 2012. And this was quite a ambitious and an evocative plan. And in terms of what we can make the city, and this is a little mini version of it. I'll leave this here, and there's another little booklet about some of the projects that we've done recently, so please have a flick through that. So I'm not going to go through this a lot now, more about just giving you a flavour. And I think at the time that we were writing this document, we had the shared space program in full flight, so there was a couple that were done and a couple in progress. And I think that really helped open people's eyes about what we can do in the city centre, and it created quite a lot of excitement and hunger for a lot more. And so when we released this document, we got 95% support for it, which if you're from council and you've ever done any consultation on plans, if you've got 15 or 20%, that's pretty sweet, because you'd normally have everyone bitching about it, about how awful everything is, rather than the people that like the idea who don't say anything. So that was, I've never had that before in any plan I've been involved in, so that was pretty exciting. So in the master plan, we've proposed 8 different transformational moves that works across the city in sort of different levels. And I won't go into this because that's a whole another hour of presentation, and that will take me over by somewhat. But I thought I'd just give a couple of little examples within that. So this is one of the moves is to stitch the city back to the harbour, which is our kind of greatest asset. And so, as I sort of said before, we've got these arterials that run across and divorce us from that. So an example project within that move is Quay Street, which is a 6-lane arterial. It's not a nice place to walk. It kind of looks like this most of the time during the day, but in peak times it's filled with traffic. But it's not easy to cross, and it's not an inviting place. So we want to turn that into, we want to detune it, and we want to turn it much more of a pedestrian place, easy to cross, and have it more of a boulevard to promenade along with a whole series of different sort of waterfront spaces. So turning it into the city's front face, and rather than an eyesore, it's a destination. Another one of the transformation moves is called the Green Link. This is in part to do with we don't have a lot of open space, or we can't make more open space in the city centre unless we knock down some buildings, but that's usually not very palatable. So this is about using our streets better, making them perform more, and that's kind of, there's been a lot of talk about that, and Steve sort of talked about it a bit this morning. And also to link in some of our major green spaces, the Domain, Albert Park, Victoria Park, and a new park that will be on a headland and Wynyard Quarter. So an example project of this one is Victoria Street. Like many streets in the city centre, it's another 6-lane street. This is what it looks like during the day. Peak time it gets a bit busy, but it's largely underutilised. And it's a major east-west street in the middle of Midtown. And the plan is to turn this into a linear park, which will connect Albert Park and Victoria Park and provide quite important public realm in the Midtown area. So while we're challenging some of those big streets, we're also looking at the little streets as well, some of the lanes and things, and making those kind of the smaller streets into a lot more pedestrian focused. So this is Federal Street. At the moment, it's a one-way street, and there's quite a lot of space in this one, but we want to turn that into a shared space in the future. And this is really building on to the shared space program that we've been doing over a number of years, but also taking it to the next level. And that's about sort of connecting them all together. Our city doesn't look like this. It's not like a hollow donut. Queen Street is our main premier retail street. But the idea with the laneway circuit is joining up all the shared spaces that we have at the moment. And there's other ones around, but this is about making a legible laneway circuit, which connects a lot of our major destinations, our libraries, the art gallery, AOT Square, which is a major civic space, and then we've got Sky Tower and a number of other churches and other sort of places. And it's also about creating an alternate pedestrian route rather than using some of the big streets. So going into the shared space program, our first shared space was completed in 2011. We've rolled out 8 over the city since then, and we've got a number of other streets around the waterfront and other areas that have components of shared space or principles within that. So there's quite a mix, but there's, I guess, 8 true shared spaces. And we've also done a few in Newland in particular, which is a suburban centre out west. We've done there's about 3 shared spaces out there. Quite a different nature of design because the context is quite different. So they're probably not the high end, but it's still, the principles are the same. So it's not just city centre. I was assuming that everyone knows what a shared space is, so I'm not going to go into it. Into a lot of detail, but just very briefly, it's a street that has pedestrians have full right of way. All the conventional street elements are removed or limited, so we don't have curbs. There's very limited signage. There's no road markings or anything like that. And it's really about behavioural change and interaction. So as Steve was sort of talking about before, it's negotiation of people working out who has right of way, and for a pedestrian and a driver to make eye contact and have a little mental discussion. And this is, at the heart, it's about creating a much higher quality public realm, a safer place to be, and very much about a place for people. So looking at some of the conditions that we had to get this thing off the ground. Catalyst is always a very useful thing to have, a deadline that you can't change. And a lot of this is, an event or something like that. And it really pushes yourself and others to make decisions and get it done. And it's similar to if you have a dinner party and you've got people coming around to dinner, you're going to vacuum you're going to put the pictures on the wall that you've been meaning to do for the last 6 months. You get your house in order, and the city works on exactly the same principle. You're a little bit house proud, a little bit city proud, so you do the housework. But it also gives you a little bit of backbone and ambition, and particularly for us, we had some big events, and the major one that we had was the Rugby World Cup. And so when you've got the world watching, you want to show off a little bit and have a bit of swagger. The Rugby World Cup was a major catalyst, but in saying that, and for New Zealand that was quite important because it's a world event, and New Zealand we quite like our rugby, and we won. Slide that one in there. But prior to that, and we did have a lot of other events. We had America's Cup. Robin's still here, is he? Where is he? Oh, there you are. We won't talk about America's Cup because that wasn't so good. But we have hosted America's Cup. We've done world yacht races and a number of other ones, and we've done quite a lot of progressive little changes and places around the city. And I think at the moment what we're seeing now is some of those little pieces starting to combine and get a bit of critical mass. You can actually see change, because sometimes you do those projects and they kind of just get lost in the mass of concrete. So an example of the change that happened with the Rugby World Cup, this is an image of Wynyard Quarter. So that's the city centre. This is part of the city centre, but it's to the west. Was a sort of former industrial area. A lot of this land is owned by council, and we have a development arm called Waterfront Auckland, who are doing some absolutely amazing work down here. And they've done a lot of master planning to create this into a new quarter of the city. A mixed-use quarter, and it will be amazing with amazing mixed-use streets, which will be on Steve's top 20 lists. But it was really the Rugby World Cup was the catalyst to actually get a project off the ground. So been a lot of talk, but the Rugby World Cup was kind of really kicked things into action. So this is what it looks like afterwards. This is quite soon after it was done, and it looks a bit better now, so it's sort of bedded in a bit. But what we've got now is we've got a new Harbour Edge promenade, we've got a new tree-lined street, we've got a playground, we've got cafes and restaurants and these converted marine sheds, a new event centre, a new bridge that was put in, so we can now walk along Quay Street and have a whole spine of the city. It's within this, Waterfront Auckland also have quite a big activation program. There's not a lot of development here at the moment, so they've been programming it out, and it's really changed how people see the city. So I often go down here on the weekend because I know something's happening. There'll be a market, there'll be a big pile of snow for the kids or something. There's always something happening, quite little scale stuff. Workshops for the kids to make little boats to float on the pond and things like that. But I think this has really started to invigorate the city. And at the same time as this was happening, we delivered a number of shared space, all part of hitting the deadline of the Rugby World Cup. Talking about some of the enablers to help move things along again, having some money helps. You don't have to have a lot of money, but it certainly makes things a lot easier. So in the city centre, we have the city centre targeted rate. So basically every business and resident have agreed to pay a little bit extra on their base tax or base land rates. and this generates over $20 million a year to spend on the city centre, so their own little pot of cash. There's a lot of other funding that comes in to deal with transport and other things, but this is purely for an uplift of the city centre. So this is either used for making an average project a lot better, or just dealing with little streets, particularly the shared space program, where it's not in anyone's priority, but certainly in terms of people living there, it is a priority. Strong leadership is pretty crucial. I mean, we've had a pretty good mayor over the recent years. He's quite ambitious and visionary, but we've also had Design Champion, who's my general manager, Ludo Campbell-Reid. He does a lot of the speaking, and he has a loud voice. He's a quite colourful character. And that's very useful in terms of getting the ears of politicians and senior management and kind of upping the ante. And also a very good, team within council, as many champions really, really being ambitious and confident about the program and excited about it. And also it's about having informed decision makers. Somebody's got to make a decision, and it is politicians or senior management. But to get a decision made, they need confidence, and I think this is a quote that, if you've ever heard Janet Sadek-Khan talk, she uses this quite a bit, so I've stolen it from her. But Michael Bloomberg, who was the mayor, used to use this with her quite a bit, and the quote is, "In God we trust and all others must bring data," and that's all about giving confidence. If you're a politician or a senior manager, if you're going to make a hard decision, and particularly with shared spaces that were new for Auckland, they want to have something that backs them up, some hard data, so that they can make those decisions. And the original team that did the first few shared spaces did a really good job about selling the dream, having evidence based from across the world, bringing the experts over to sell it, because if you're within council, you can't be an expert. You have to fly in someone else like Steve. But it was at all levels, so about what this will do for businesses, what it will do for residents, and so there's a whole kind of package. And it took a little while to get that in trains, but it was they went away with it really well. So jumping into some of the projects that we've done, this is Elliott Street in Midtown sort of area. This is it before. It had been upgraded a couple of times prior, so it was a sort of a slow street, and it wasn't terrible, but it was still pretty dominated by cars and loading and vehicles, and it was just looking a bit tired. And this is what it looks like afterwards. And we had the quality of the spaces increased massively. And this is, and the foot traffic had increased, fairly modest 10%, because it was quite busy beforehand. But really it's the quality of that public realm has changed a hell of a lot. And people are kind of now staying here a bit longer. It's a nice place to sit, and that starts plugging into the numbers where we've got more people staying and spending a bit more money, so 20% increase in consumer spending. And this is pretty important when you're talking with businesses, and often you talk about car parks and it's going to be the end of the world, but if you can start throwing these figures at them, we're not killing their business, we're actually trying to help them along. Derby Street, this was actually the first one we did. This Elliott Street comes along here in the background, and we've got Queen Street, our premier retail street here, so it's a bit of a link between the two. So it's a pretty small street, quite short, very dominated by cars, previously a one-way street, and it was used as a bit of a rat run. This is what it looks like afterwards. This is actually the opening event. It's not quite that busy, but it is still pretty good. We've got a big increase in the foot traffic coming along here now. That's 57% increase afterwards. But also all the buildings, all the property owners revamped their frontages, and there's a lot of new tenancies that have gone in. So overall, the street has become a lot nicer. Jean Batten Place. This is in the downtown area. This is what it looked like before. It was essentially just a little rat run for cars, and even though we had a pretty wide footpath down one side, it wasn't a particularly inviting place for people. And this is what it looks like afterwards. So we've got less cars going through there now, a quarter less, and at lower speeds. And it's a lot more inviting for people to walk up and down. Fort Street. This is next to Jean Batten Place, which is just poking off this building here. So we've done a number in this area. This was probably one of our largest shared spaces at the time, probably still is one of the largest. We've done